Okay, so you got two handouts today. The first one is assignment 107. And no, I haven't gone off my rocker and skipped 3 assignments. This is assignment 107, and it is the last. I could say instead this is the final for the class. But I keep them numbered. It just keeps things a little bit cleaner. This is what is due at the end of the semester, which is your final portfolio. We're going to start working on it today. Because we're in InDesign, it makes logical sense to start working on it. I'm going to lecture about portfolios in general, but I want to at least hand this out and walk through it a little bit so you guys can see what's going down. It is worth 30% of your overall grade, so don't forget that it's a big factor at the end. And all too often, people leave this to the last minute, and they don't do as well as they think they should on it, and that drags their grade down. It's more often that people do a poor job on this because they're running out of time at the end, and their grade goes down than it is that they did an excellent job and their grade goes up. So be aware that that's kind of the trajectory of what happens. If you start working on it now and keep working on it consistently through the end of the semester, it will end up being a very good portfolio. And it's very obvious the people that throw portfolios together in a day versus the people who work on it over the course of the semester and really polish it and make it look good. So we're going to start on it today, working through kind of your initial layouts, what's working, what's not working, that sort of thing. We'll continue to work on it throughout the semester as we go forward. There will be a few more days where we'll talk about portfolios and work through portfolios. I will also, after I'm done with lecture today, I will bring a bunch of previous class portfolios in so you guys can look through them to get ideas. I'll set them in the back so that you can see them. We'll talk about binding them and that sort of thing as well. In terms of when it's due, it'll be on the last day of this class, which is Monday, May 22nd. I always schedule it on the Monday of finals week so that it's over with and done. You turn it in and you move on. Technically speaking, this class spans two class periods, therefore both finals apply. So I could have you come on Monday and on Wednesday during finals, but I'm not going to. We're just coming on Monday. You'll come in, you'll turn in your portfolio. I'll have a survey for you to fill out. You'll eat donuts. Life is good. Okay? So that's the plan. You need to give me a physical copy of this portfolio. It's not something that's just the online. So thus far, you've always given me a paper printout, but I grade the one that's online. You post it online, I grade that version. For the portfolio, I actually grade the printed version. So the printed one is the part that matters. You'll have to post it online too, but it's the printed version that I care about. You'll turn that into me by 9:30 on the day of the final. So class time is different in final terms. You'll have class here from 8 to 10 on Monday, May 22nd. So you need to turn it in by 9:30 of that day. At 10, I will not accept any more work at all for the semester. Class is officially over. Whatever you've turned in, that's it. And I'm very strict on that. So class is over at 10 that day. I think that about covers it. Are there any questions about this in general? No? Okay, we'll talk about more details as we go forward, but I like to at least introduce that and have you guys so that you can read that. And then we'll go into exercise 112 and what we're doing a little bit later. But before we do that, I want to take a minute and actually talk about portfolios and kind of walk through them. And I think the thing about portfolios is it's something that you will always need if you're in a design field of any caliber. So if you're a graphic designer, you'll need a portfolio. If you're an industrial designer, you'll need a portfolio. If you're an architectural designer, you'll need a portfolio. And that portfolio is important for you as a student right now, and it's important when you're out in the workplace trying to get a job. It's important when you've been working in the field for 20 years. It's still always something that's very, very important for you to have. It's about telling the story of you. And I think all too often, portfolios end up falling into the category of, I'm trying to say that I have all these skills. I can do V-Ray rendering. I can do SketchUp modeling. I can do Photoshop. I'm awesome. But that's not really about you as the designer. It's about you and the skill set that you have. And really, the portfolio is designed to showcase who you are as a designer, what makes you special, what makes you good. And if you think about the uses of a portfolio, okay, in the immediate future for you guys, the portfolio either has to do with being admitted to a 4-year program or a 5-year program in the case of a Cal Poly, being admitted, maybe studio placement. Those are the first two things that are going to be hitting you. So if your portfolio is all about, I just have these skills, does that necessarily enhance your chances of getting in? No, it's a design school. You want to get in for your design ability. So that's what you want to show. When you go out to get a job, which is the other big use of a portfolio that you would need in the immediate term, in that case, maybe showing some skill wouldn't be a bad thing because the jobs you're going to be applying for are like internship level positions. So saying I'm really good at CAD, look at these CAD drawings, okay, maybe that would be useful. But you can still show things like I'm really good at AutoCAD through your design process. And I would argue that any firm that's looking at your portfolio would rather see a little bit of design flair. If they were looking for somebody who was a CAD specialist to work as a draftsperson, they wouldn't be hiring you. Right? Believe it or not, I don't know any of you or any of your CAD skills. There are people that are better at AutoCAD than you are right now. And so if a firm really needed somebody to draw some stuff in AutoCAD and they just wanted a CAD person, they'd hire that person. So they're looking at you as an intern trying to help you along in your design process. So they would be interested in seeing your design process beyond the fact that you have skills in V-Ray or Rhino or whatever else. So think of it as a story of you. What are you trying to come across as? What kind of a designer are you? What kind of things are interesting to you? Those will be absolutely critical. So what makes you unique and different? And I think this last little bit about what makes you unique and different is kind of the fun part of a portfolio. You never know what you're going to slide into a portfolio or what's going to make it exciting for somebody to be looking at. Let's think about applying to grad school. Obviously, you guys aren't there yet, but let's use the Berkeley example. Okay, so they have a grad school program. They might let in maybe 17 people a year, somewhere in that neighborhood. Let's call it round number, 20 people. Okay, they might get 3,000 applicants, 5,000 applicants. Every one of those is a highly qualified, good architectural student. They have good projects. But what makes you you? Why are they going to pick you? So those are the things that you can weave into your portfolio. Maybe you're really good at painting. Maybe you're really passionate about something. I did a bunch of research in limnology, lake ecology research when I was an undergrad, not related to architecture at all, but I found a way to weave that into my grad school portfolio because it was part of me. Not related, and I did a bunch of drawings relating to it and whatever, so it kind of fit in a weird, bizarre way, but it made me different than everybody else. And so you have to think about what makes you from an architectural perspective, and what makes you different. What makes you unique? And make sure that your portfolio tells that part of the story. You need to have some kind of an introductory page. You can't just bust right into your portfolio, here's my first project. You need some kind of a table of contents type page. It should probably identify you as the designer. It should probably identify these are the things that are going to be in my portfolio. This is what I'm going to show you. These are the names of the project, something like that. And it might contain additional information about yourself. I've seen it done where the first page in a portfolio has a little bit of resume look to it. And that can work really nicely if you're trying to apply to a firm to work or something. You want to show the resume as part of it. For a school portfolio, not really relevant. They're not going to care where you interned. They're going to care more about the design process. But you always need this introductory page. And what it looks like is going to vary depending on who you are and what your design sense is going to be. But you still need to have that piece of the portfolio. The other thing is you need to keep your portfolio current. Every year, every semester, you do new design projects. You evolve. You become better at what it is that you're doing. Therefore, theoretically, your project is better than the last one. And it doesn't mean that you can throw away your old projects, but it means that chances are you've evolved. You become a different person in the time that you've done these new projects. So really, you don't want your projects to be more than 3 or 5 years old. So for example, for me, if I was doing an updated portfolio right now, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to include a bunch of my undergraduate projects because they're like ancient history. Even though they might have been good or exciting or interesting, they're not necessarily as relevant. I would argue if you don't have a lot of projects, you can go back further than 3 to 5 years in terms of what you've put in there. You just want to be careful. And the reason that you want to be careful is because it's not the current version of you. If I was updating my portfolio now, I'd want to do the projects that I'm currently working on. because that would reflect more accurately the things that I'm doing right now. The portfolio is fundamentally a living document. It always will be a living document. It always needs to be updated. If you have a good format, if you have a good base, if you've set up a good InDesign file that has the right stuff in it, it's really easy to add pages. You add pages, you rearrange, you stick stuff further into the back, and ultimately you get rid of it. That's to be expected. So it lives, it updates. At least every semester you should update it. The other thing that has a tendency to happen with portfolios is you spend a lot of time, you do a great portfolio, and then you forget about it for a year or two. And then you have to go back and find all your work and put it back in and remember, now what was that project about? If I was going to write a little summary of the design theory behind this project, could I remember exactly what I was going to write? Not as well as at the time. So if, for example, I wanted to put my grad thesis in a portfolio, now, being 10 years after I did my grad thesis, I'd have a hard time going back and writing a summary of what on earth it was about. At the time, I wrote 80 pages about what it was about. So you would think at that time it would be a good time to put the little summary piece in. So think about if it's a living document and you're constantly updating it, after the semester you go in and update it, it'll be more current, you'll have a better product at the end. The other thing that's critical is as you look at your portfolio as a body of work, think about why is this particular project important to include as part of your portfolio. There should always be a reason behind a particular project and why it's in your portfolio. If, for example, I really like 3D rendering, I'm throwing it in there just because I'm really good at 3D rendering and I have pretty pictures, 3D rendering, 3D rendering, 3D rendering, 3D rendering, all of a sudden my portfolio is made up of 3D renderings. If I was a 3D artist, if I was a visualization specialist and I wanted to get firms to hire me to do their visualizations for them, that would make sense. There's a purpose behind each one. In your case, as a student, there isn't necessarily, you might be really good at 3D rendering, but you want to showcase other pieces of your design background. So you just want to make sure you avoid this repetition and that you think carefully about what project belongs and why. You want to think about diversity in your projects and your skill set. So if you do a project in Vectorworks, you do a different project in AutoCAD, you do a different project in V-Ray and Rhino, those are good milestones to set, assuming the design of those projects is warranted to be in your portfolio. Assuming what you've done from a design standpoint is good, then showing those different skill sets is a good thing. Don't just show the skill sets because they're skill sets. Does that make sense? So you're balancing all of these options. Group work. This is the challenging one. You will, especially in school, be part of group work. You always will. You guys move on to 220. Right now you're in 121. It's not that big a deal. You do most of your projects individually, right? Nods. I think so. That's my recollection of it. You move into 220, and there's too many students for the size of the class, and Anthony always groups you together. So you have a group of 2 people, maybe. Maybe it's a group of 3 people to do your project. Group work is hard to put in a portfolio because if you stick the same project in that somebody else is, you're both applying for the same scholarship, you're both applying for the same school, you're both applying for the same internship. The person who's looking at the portfolio is like, wait a minute, I just saw this. Who is it? Who did it? So one of the key things about the group work is that it's okay to include it in your portfolio, but you have to be really clear that it was 1, group work, and 2, this is what you did as part of the group work. So if I did this graphic, if I did this rendering, if I did a particular piece of the puzzle that made up the group work, I want to make sure that my focus of my portfolio is the part that I did. And you talk about that part of it. That's the nature of group work. You did some work, I did some work. Just make sure your part is what you talk about. The temptation, especially if the group project was really good and you slacked off and didn't do too much work, is to show all the other people's work. Well, down the road, you show that work, you get into a harder studio, you get a job because of that work, and suddenly you can't do that. You false advertise yourself. You aren't that person. You can't do that. So be true to who you are and what your work is as part of the group. Just remember, it's likely that other people in the group are showing work too. And chances are, the person who's evaluating your portfolio against somebody else is seeing both. a killer portfolio is always well designed. So we focus so much in architecture school on the architecture, on the design process, and these cool projects. And sometimes we lose track of the importance of things like graphic design, typography. All of the things that I've talked about for the last 4 lectures in the InDesign section is absolutely critical to moving forward in your portfolio. You have to have good typography. You have to have well-established hierarchy. You have to have good layouts. Is it a 3-column layout? How do you break that layout? How do you show your stuff? If you don't do a good job, if you don't do a good job with the graphic side of things, people aren't going to spend a lot of time on your particular portfolio. Let's revisit the grad school example. 3,000, 5,000 applicants, 20 slots to fill. Do you really think the faculty that are evaluating portfolios are going to spend 10 minutes a portfolio? No way. There's no way. They're going to spend 30 seconds. They're going to open the first couple pages, look quick. Does anything grab their eye? Flip through, look at the last page. That's about it. If your portfolio is well designed, the content of it will leap off the page and get people excited about it. The little details really, really matter. Sorry about that. I have no idea. Go away. The little details really matter. Understanding setup. So we're going to talk about a little bit more advanced setup strategy in InDesign. And part of the reason that I weave this into the InDesign section is because we're right in the middle of it, and now it makes sense to start your portfolio layout. So, a couple things that matter. When we start to look at the page, we're probably going to do facing pages, which means it's a book. We open the 2 pages and look at the 2 side by side. We want to think about multiple pages, so it's no longer 1 page, it's lots of pages. And we're also going to use something called bleed. If you think about, let's say, a magazine that's printed, or a newspaper that's printed, or any normal document that's printed, if the image ended exactly where the border of the page was going to be, and it went through a process and they're printing 100,000 copies of something, chances are at some point the paper is going to get slightly off. Right? The ink's going to be slightly off. Something's going to go wrong in the printing process. When that happens, if your image was exactly the size of the 8.5 by 11 page that was coming through, there'd be weird white margins around the outside, kind of diagonal. Something got skewed. It didn't go through the printer correctly. So we compensate with something called bleed. Bleed means that whenever an image or text, though text would be kind of rare, it's mostly always an image or a background color, whenever it goes to the edge of the page, we include an extra 1/8 of an inch all the way around the outside of the page. That gives us space to crop off when it goes through printing. So any professional print shop, let's say you go to have your portfolio bound at a professional, printed and bound at a professional print shop, not a Kinko's, but somewhere more professional that would do an offset press or something like that. They're going to print anything on a larger size page and then cut it to the right size. And this is actually the case if you were sending it to an online printer a lot of times. And if you look at a book, the pages are always bigger and then they get cut down. That's the nature of it. So we compensate with something called bleed. So we're going to make sure that we set up bleed today as part of our InDesign document. Furthermore, we're going to make sure that we're in CMYK color space. We'll talk about what that means in a little bit later, but this has to do with the ink process. How we create our colors is based on the toners that are going to be printed. We want to make sure that the inner margin is double what the outer margin is so that we can compensate for a binding in the center. If we don't have that space for the binding, we'll cut holes through part of our content and it'll get awkward. So let's look at it this way. So this is our portfolio setup of pages. It doesn't really matter whether it's landscape or portrait orientation. In this case, it's portrait. It fits better on the slide. But as we look at this, the edge of our page, right, is right there. The bleed goes all the way out to there. So if we were putting images on our page, we'd let them go past the bleed edge. When the page is actually printed, it would be printed at 11.25 inches by 8.625 inches, i.e. we added 1/8 of an inch to the 8.5 by 11 page. That allows us to trim off the excess and make it exactly 8.5 by 11 with our photos. So they're full width printing. The inner margin's a little bit bigger to compensate for the binding than the outer margin. This one always gets, it's hard to see. This is from a guy named Alex Holgraf, who is an architectural visualization specialist. He went through architecture school, decided he really liked visualizations, and he works for other firms to do their visualizations for them. He is absolutely fantastic at what he does. I would argue he's one of the best. And it's worth looking at. I think his architecture, his website is visualizingarchitecture.com. Really worth looking at to get inspired. His stuff is absolutely beautiful. As part of it, he does produce a portfolio periodically. And he produces so much content that his portfolios are, this particular one is volume 3. He has big, thick portfolios. This is volume 3. But I'm going to show you this as a good example of a high-quality portfolio layout. So this is the cover. We'll come back to covers a little bit later on. And we'll look at these pages. Now it's important when I'm showing these pages, they are all spreads. They all have a division right there at the halfway point. This is one half of the page. This is the other half of the page. As we were to turn the pages, it would be like that. Does that make sense? So every image that I show you is across a spread or 2 pages. So in this example, remember the first thing that we're going to include is some kind of a table of contents along with a little bit of personal identifying information. So you open the portfolio and what do you see? Very clear. Contents. It's a 3-column layout. Contents occurs in the first column. We've got a skinny column of little graphics, and then we have a column of explanations. On the facing page right there is information about him. Remember, it should include at least a little bit of information about you. He didn't include his name in this case, but in this example, his website is his name, so it kind of works as both. And he has a little bit of more content down here. Let's see if I can mute that sound. So let's continue on. And we move into the first project. Now he's done something a little bit clever. And if I jump back for a second, each of the projects that he has a little identifier graphic next to it. So that one has a little squares. This one is a different little grid. These little identifiers then coordinate to the pages. And so if we jump forward to the next piece, this is his 9-square cube house. It has 9 squares. The little graphic is in the upper corner right there, and that's consistent page to page. So let's look at this as an overall layout. We have a strong flow line that's established across at the top of the page. Notice there's the squares there. We also, he's using a line that splits one of the page in half. So we have 3/4 there, that's full image, and then a quarter left over. This would be 1/4, this would be 3/4 of the page. This 1/4 is where the text and content goes. And we have a nice little overlap there with yellow that identifies the title of this particular project. Let's move forward to the next slide. Okay, we're doing something very, very similar. Same project. We're dividing the page. In this case, it's a little bit more like 2/3, 1/3, but it's still very consistent where we have a large section of the page and a small section of the page. Notice the color is also yellow, so the highlight color on the first page matches up with the tone of the drawings. It's a combination of that color drawing and then the content. In this case, we have a 4-column layout there. We've spanned 3 of the columns with the text at the bottom for line length. We move forward. Again, there's a page division. Different project in this case, different little graphic up here in the corner, but there's our 3/4 and there's our 1/4. So you see the consistency page to page? This layout is established to allow these kinds of things to be consistent, and when you look at each page, it starts to feel like it belongs as a body of work. They're not just an independent, oh, this page looks nice this way, then we move to the next page, graphically completely different. You can tell that this belongs to the same body of work. Right? We have 3 columns again here. Really nicely done overall colored page, with that little graphic bar that goes across at the bottom. Move forward here to the next one. Another example here. Once again, division. Right? This one's again a little bit more like a third, and this would be 2/3. But you can see consistently across the pages, this is the layout that's used over and over again. The flow line is also very consistent on a lot of the pages. If I were to flip back through, you could see that that line stays consistent at the top through many of them. Though he does flip it, if I jump back one slide, that line just moved to the bottom. But this dimension here is the same as it is forward on the next slide. Whoops. Right there. See how that's the same? So there's just a consistency of vocabulary. The other thing as we go through this is the fonts are all the same. The typography is the same. The sizes are the same on every page. That absolutely has to happen for a good, clean portfolio. So you establish the hierarchy and you're consistent all the way through the design process here. Now, of course, I'm showing you his portfolio. His graphics are unbelievably good. So it's a little bit loaded to show you a portfolio full of this stuff. But I want you to see the upper end of how this really works together. So in this case, we have 3 columns and 3 columns. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, and 3. And in this case, there isn't that strong flow line that we had across the page, but it is a strong 3-column layout. Notice that this graphic is still consistently at the top corner of the page. It's always there. It's always a guiding force. That's the project that it belongs to. Sometimes something as simple as that little piece lets us know we're part of the same project. It's just a graphic cue for this particular drawing. Another example here where he's broken into the full page color renderings. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all do renderings like this? I'd like to do renderings like this. But notice that that 2/3 or 3/4, 1/4 still happens right there as part of that division. He did a really nice job on these pages also with the small margin between them. The little white lines really divide up these little vignettes of study. Consistent font and type. Our logo is still there in the upper corner. Consistency, page to page. So another example. So that was the ultra professional, super graphic quality portfolio. I'll move into more student examples. This is not a student that ever went here. This is something I found online. And so I apologize to Amin. I have no idea who he or she is, but we're going to critique this portfolio anyway. So we start with the cover, which I think is very well done. Typography is carefully considered. What is bold, what is not bold. Graphically, nicely done. The black background with the highlighted little model, really, really nice. Compositionally nice, etc. So remember, these are always spreads. There's a page division right there between the 2 pages. This is a white page, so it's hard to see. First page, information about the person. Right there is our information. Again, very carefully considered typography. What's bold, what's all caps versus what's standard case, what's the software choice, etc. Or excuse me, what's the font choice, etc. Always very good. Okay, clean. So this is a little bit more than just basic information. This is who I am. In this case, it's the full resume. So this person was probably applying for a job somewhere. So we're seeing the full resume. Opposite that, on the next page, is our content page. Again, consistent, well-done typography, little graphics that represent what each of the projects are, page numbers in the middle, followed by the text that represents what these projects are. Move into the next page. 2/3, 1/3, or 3/4, 1/4 layout, similar to what I was talking about before. This then represents the text part. We've got a second column that is all pictures. And then we have the large picture that represents this whole page. This picture is a little bit hard by itself because it doesn't have strong defined edges. Parts of it extend beyond, like there's the photo background, this extends beyond, so it just kind of needs to live on its own. It would be hard to frame it in with any other objects. Notice at the bottom, we do have a little line here. Let me clear off this Too many lines all at once. Down here at the bottom, there's a little line, and underneath it, it says what the project was. So instead of that little graphic thing that was on Alex's portfolio with the little squares, you know, the thing with the little squares. Let's see if I can do it. Right? He had the little squares, the little thing that goes through. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Instead of that little graphic thing, down here, it's text coupled with the little line. There's also a little bit of text showing up at the bottom that explains what these images are and what the purpose of those images are. In this case, this is again in the margin space, but it's very small, very subtle. I think that was it for that portfolio. We'll move on to another one. Again, very clean cover. We'll talk about covers as a whole separate lecture because that's equally as important as the portfolio itself. Let's move into the inside. So in this case, it's only the table of contents, no graphics with it. It might be a little bit stark. You'd have to do a little bit more reading as part of it. And I really think a little bit of name information should show up here. Next page is a resume. Carefully considered typography. Then we move into the actual portfolio. Still a consistent 3/4, 1/4. There's our division line right there. He or she has broken that nicely with the title. Again, carefully considered typography. And it certainly helps that the overall composition of this spread, the image itself, is really nice. We've got a lot of strong diagonals working their way through the picture. That helps in this overall piece. So even though there's not too much going on besides the 3/4, 1/4, the background image itself provides a lot of interest as part of it. Another example page here. 2 columns. 1 column, 2 column. We've got this piece that spans both, and then we have these smaller diagrams. Over here, we essentially have 2 columns again. We have this column and this column. The only difference is that they're shifted a little bit that way. To me, this space is rather vacant as part of this layout. I think it could be a little bit more loaded. They could do something with it. But again, to each their own. Next page in the portfolio, the 2 columns is now broken into more columns because the content increases in complexity. I think this would be a little bit more effective if there was a little bit of a white gap between each of those columns. They kind of collide together the way they are right now. I think the page on the left here is actually well laid out. We have the 3 column, 1, 2, and 3. And there's kind of a nice strong diagonal as part of this page with how all of these are laid out, which gives a good space for the text at the bottom. So it's not as consistent as, let's say, Alex's portfolio, where it's always 3/4, 1/4, page to page to page. But I think this is still very carefully considered as a page. Okay, so I wanted to show you an example of a former student who went to DVC. This is his portfolio at the end of his DVC tenure. And so I wanted to kind of walk through because this is the portfolio you would ultimately be creating as part of your stay here before you moved on to, say, Berkeley or Cal Poly or something like that. Bashir is actually, if I'm not mistaken, he's in the Czech Republic right now. He's in Prague at school. So that's where he ended up going. But it doesn't really matter. I think it's a really good example of a portfolio that includes content that you're going to be creating. So let's go through it a little bit. First page, we talked about it needs that index page. So here we are in the index page. And he's broken it into certain major categories and then shown those categories in a consecutive number of pages. He then flips over into an introductory page about himself. This portfolio ended up being a little bit longer and a little bit thicker than a traditional portfolio. Generally speaking, if you're applying, say, to grad school or to various undergrad programs, they will have a cap on the number of pages you can use as a whole. So in grad school, maybe it's 12 pages. As an undergrad, it might be 4 pages. So you have to think carefully about what you're showing and how it's going to be shown. In this case, he's a little bit more open-ended in terms of what he's showing. Therefore, a page that's dedicated to an introduction is acceptable. For this class, there is no page limit, so you can feel free to add as much as you want as part of it. So we move into the next page. Mondrian Museum, this is where you guys are going in 121 right now. And so he started this with some freehand sketches. It's set up with a nice typography where we have projects, and then Mondrian Museum is on all lowercase, same font, different sizes. And then he has his two sketches. It's still set up roughly on a 3/4, 1/4 layout. We've got the large, major kind of showcase image. As we move forward to the next page, we move into the more technical side of things. We still have that 3/4, 1/4. This time it's divided there. There's our 3/4 content. There's our 1/4 content. To me, sometimes when you put the text right here against the edge, the inner edge of a particular piece of content, it can get really hard to read. Remember, we're folding the page right here. And if it gets too deep into the crease, you can't read it as well. So I always prefer when the text goes on the outside. But that's just a personal preference. So it's something you want to think of. He did leave a fair amount of space right in here to make sure that the binding wouldn't affect that. So you just want to be aware of it. There is a nice consistency to the little vignette sizes. This is the same as this, likewise this, are all kind of consistent in their size and their vocabulary and their spacing. We move on to the Calder Museum, where you guys are going. The text serves right there as our 3/4, 1/4 layout. You can see that this is kind of a common theme in a lot of architectural portfolios in terms of how it's laid out. We have the large image. Again, consistency in the font. Calder Museum, same size, same font, all lowercase as Mondrian Museum. A little bit more text about it showing up there as 2 columns. The choice to do 2 columns versus 1 column is a personal preference of what feels right as part of your portfolio. Okay, so here's a project that they did that was a group project. So we talked about group projects. I wanted to include a group project as part of the portfolios. So on the introductory page, we have the same kind of setup that he's had everywhere else, where we have the 3/4, 1/4. But notice we've got Serpentine Pavilion, again, same font and all the rest of it. But below it, we have the names of everybody who worked on it. So it's clear I'm not trying to take credit for this whole project as being mine. There are other people that worked on it. I'm coming right out on the introductory page and saying other people worked on it. I'm not trying to hide that fact. Then we flip the page and we talk about the things that he did specifically. What are the kinds of things that made his contribution to the project? And so he's showing those particular pieces of the graphics. Now it's hard because I know the project a little bit better than you do, and this is something that happened a long time ago, but you can clearly see, and I know, that there were a lot more drawings than just these pieces. There were probably a bunch of plans, there was probably more technical information. He's showing the things that he did as part of this project. Now, of course, in the text, he's talking about we wanted to do this, and we did this, and whatever, because it is we. But the graphics that he's showing are the things that he contributed as part of the group. And then you get into some of the actual technical fabrication and whatever. This was a lot of what he did, so he's emphasizing that as part of this particular project. This was part of 136, where you had to do the table and the chair. And as this sets up, this is obviously showcasing rendering as part of his skill set, as opposed to a really high quality design, though you could argue that the piece of furniture might be a nice high quality piece of design. But we've got the font consistent with every other project that we've shown. We've got the layout with the 3/4, 1/4, still the same and consistent across everything that he's done. So this lecture was based a lot on an article. That's the website address, so you can go and read the article if you want. This is the Visualizing Architecture. This is Alex Holgraff's website. I would encourage you to go look at that, especially if you're looking for inspiration, and you can kind of see some of the things that he does as part of it as well. So we're going to switch gears, and we're going to move over into InDesign, and I'm going to talk about multi-page layouts, etc. So let's take a 10-minute break or so. We'll start back up at 9:01. And then we'll move from there. Okay, so we're going to continue in InDesign. I've flipped over to the school computer, and I want to talk today about multiple pages and how do you work with a kind of creating a book, so to speak. When we get to the InDesign splash screen that you've all seen before, we're not going to click on book or library. We're going to continue clicking on a document. Book is kind of its own realm in the world of InDesign. We're not going to deal with that. We're just going to work on a document. So we'll do a new document. If we check the intent as being print, it will be in the CMYK color space that I told you that we needed to work in. So we're going to make sure that it says print. Number of pages, we'll go ahead and start with 3 pages. We can, of course, add them as we go forward. I'm going to make sure that I have the box checked for facing pages. It is certainly reasonable and or something you may want to consider to only have single-sided pages in your portfolio. The reason that we have a tendency to make it like a book where they're double-sided pages is it gives us the flexibility of spanning across the page, which is nice. But it also, if for example, you're applying to grad school and the page limit is 12 pages, well, guess what? If I do front and back, I get 24 pages instead of just 12 pages. So you just want to be aware of those kinds of things, which is part of why we generally do facing pages. I am going to use a letter size page. You'll see in the back, I did put the portfolios. I went into my office and grabbed portfolios from previous semesters. You'll see that some people chose different formats. Instead of 8.5 by 11, they chose a square, an 8 by 8 square or something like that. That is perfectly reasonable to pick. Obviously, you're going to be cutting page sizes down or paying somebody to cut the page sizes down. For my purposes today, I'm going to use regular legal paper or regular letter paper and call it a day. I have had people do portfolios on 11 by 17 pieces of paper. I wouldn't encourage 11 by 17 portfolios because they're too big and unwieldy. If you're handing it to somebody or turning it into somebody, they want an 8.5 by 11 sized object to hold on to. If it's big, they then have to keep track of this big object and do I fold it? Do I roll it up? It's awkward. And so if you keep it in the max size of 8.5 by 11, it's kind of easy to go with everything else that they're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it at letter size, which means the width and height are already set for me. However, I am going to do this in landscape format. Personally, I like looking at it as landscape format, so I have 2 pages like this that go together that make my book, rather than 2 pages that go like this. It's dependent on your personal preference. If you look in the back, I have portfolios that go both ways. It just depends on what your preference is. So I'm going to go ahead and do it in landscape. My number of columns, I'm going to leave it at 1. My gutter, I'm going to leave there. And my margins, top and bottom, inside, outside, I'm going to leave all of those at 0 for right now. So I'll type 0 everywhere. And then I'm going to click on this button for more options. Suddenly we have something called bleed. Remember I talked about bleed before? So we want our bleed at the top, bottom, and outside to be 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125 IN for inches. And that's going to set it at the top, bottom, inside, and outside. I'm going to uncheck the little chain and change the inside to be 0 because I want those to come together as 1. So, okay, so I have 1/8 of an inch for the top, the bottom, and the outside. My slug, I'm going to leave at 0. There's a subtle difference between the two, but for our purposes, it doesn't matter. I'll go ahead and say OK at that point. And when I do that, we have my first page followed by my second and third pages. And you see that now I have my overall page here. I have extra red line that goes around here. That's my bleed. And so I'm going to start working with it. Let me go ahead and switch to my pages window. I'm working in the advanced workspace right now. So I would encourage you to go ahead and switch to advanced for right now. And in the advanced workspace right here at the top, we're going to click on pages. And that brings up the pages window. And I want to walk through what's happening in the pages window so that you guys can see kind of how it works. So right now, I have a page 1, a page 2, and a page 3. And they're indicated by their page numbers, 1, 2, and 3. Above that, there's kind of a double line. And above that, I have something called a master, and I have 2 pages showing. So what InDesign allows us to do is it allows us to create a page that has content on it that would appear on every page that it's applied to. So it's kind of like working with a paragraph style or a character style where we can make changes to one page and it applies to multiple pages. So this concept of a master page is where when you put stuff on a master page, it will show up on every other page. So for example, I'm going to work on the A master to start. I'm going to double click up here and go to the A master. And it can be a little confusing because the page actually looks the same as it does, right there is my page, there we go, as it does if I was on pages 2 and 3. The difference is when I'm on the A master, there's no pages above or below it. It's just the one spread. So now that I'm on the A master, when I go to make a change on a particular page, so let's say that I put a black square on this page, every page in my document that has the A master applied to it will have that box show up on it. So here we are on page 1. See in the upper corner it says A. That means it's the A master for page 1. There it is again, the A master for page 3. Therefore, anything that I do up here on the master will occur on those pages. So for example, if I were to type my last name, let's make it a little bit bigger here, that would show up on every page. So you can see how this can work nicely in your favor. Couple caveats with this system. One, using it to deal with text boxes never really works that well. So if you're trying to make a text box show up on page after page after page, it never really works as well as you'd want it to. I'll show you how to deal with that a little bit later on. So let's go ahead, and I deleted that content. Let's go ahead and set up the A master for some work. And so I'm going to start by switching my default units into inches. And I'm going to work using some guides, and I'm going to create those guides across the A master. So let's go ahead and start. I'm going to drag from the ruler, and I'm going to drag this over so it shows up halfway across the page, which would be right there. And this gives me my 3/4, 1/4 general layout. All right, so there, that's just kind of establishing things. I might also establish a flow line across the top. Notice that the guideline here falls on just one of the two pages unless I'm outside of both pages, in which case it goes all the way across. So let's go ahead and pull that down by maybe 3/4 of an inch or so, like that. And so now I have my 3/4, my 1/4. I have a line that goes across the top of the page, and I could start to work with that as my content. Now that I've created those guides on the master layer, remember they're going to show up on every actual page. So if I go to page 1, for example, there's the guides. There's the guides again. So let's go back to my A master, and let's add a little bit more. Okay, let's say that I want a piece of content to span across that whole section. Actually, let's go ahead and make it the full height to there. You see that that X shows up, and when I move to my various pages, that X is going to show up on pages 2 and 3. If I were to add some more pages, say 4 and 5, that X shows up there as well. So I can create these layouts that I can then reuse down the road. And it's as simple as if I'm on pages 4 and 5, if I wanted to place an object, I could go to File and then Place, and I could drop an object I had some stuff here onto that particular page. Let me right click and go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, and there I have a part of this that I was working on. Okay, in this case it's not showing up that well. It's a drawing, it's not a photograph, but you guys get the idea. I can drop it in on any particular page. Let's get rid of those two pages for right now and go back. So let me go back up to my A master. And now I might want to consider some other things to occur on the page. Maybe I want a little bit of a footer down here at the bottom. We'll do a 1/2 inch, something like that. And maybe I want there to be, like that one example, a line that would occur Come on. And we'll go across to right there. Perfect. So I wanted a little line to occur there. That little line then would show up on, say, pages 2 and 3. There's the line. And I could put some other content down below it. So let's go ahead and start working with text. And I told you text is one of those weird, iffy things that really doesn't belong in the master. And we'll put it on the page itself. So let me go ahead and I'll start with my text tool. I'm going to drop it in right there on my page. And I need to write some text. Remember, my font choice is going to matter. Let's go ahead and use Arial. I'm picking Arial because it's a very generic font. If I were doing my own personal portfolio, I probably wouldn't pick Arial, but I'm using it as an example because it will apply better to all of you. And let's go ahead and bump it up to maybe 16 point. And under Style, let's go ahead and go to Bold. I'll do it in all capitals, and we'll say this is Artist Retreat, for example. Let me adjust the spacing ever so slightly. Let's move this over so that there's a little bit of a gap. Go to right there. And then I'm going to shrink this down so it's right there. And then let me go ahead and copy this, Control-C, Control-V. And underneath that line, we're going to change the size. One of the things that happens more frequently than anything else is that people make the fonts too big in their portfolio. You don't need big fonts. If you're doing body text, 10 point or smaller is probably a good thing. So let me go back to regular, and I'm going to fill it with some generic stuff for right now because I'm not going to sit there and write it. Let me get some Latin. All right. I just want some default text here. Control-C, and then over here, Control-V. So you guys see how I'm just kind of filling that with filler text for right now. If you're doing your layout and you don't want to actually do real text in there just yet, put some filler text in and see how it works. So I now have Artist Retreat. I have some filler text. I need an image that would do the whole thing. So let me go to File and then Place. And let's see if I can find an image that would work. Give me a second. Sorry, I have to look through. Let me drop that image in. And let me do Control- to zoom out. Now remember, when I place that image in, the image really should be all the way, the bleed should go all the way to the top and the bottom, like that. And let me right-click, go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. And then I need to make some adjustments for my content. Looks like it actually clips off the top. It's a bad rendering, but you guys get the idea. So I've now placed this in as part of my overall image here, and we could look at this as a whole page that starts to describe this particular content. If we go into View, Screen Mode, and then Preview, we'll see it without the bleed, and we can see it as an overall spread. And you can see the kind of the text and the general placement of things. So let's go ahead and let's add a little bit more to this. I'm going to do another page based on this same content. So let's add 4 and 5. And let's go back to my View, Screen Mode, Normal. There it is. Now if I wanted the text to go from one page to the other, this is where I was saying it doesn't really work well on the master. I'll just select it on the first page. I held down Shift to select both pieces. I'll go to Edit and then Copy, and then I'll move to page 5 here, and I'll go to Edit, and you'll see one of the options is Paste in Place. Paste in place says put it in the same spot on this page that it was on the page that I copied from. So if I paste in place, the text goes in the exact same spot, which is nice. So now in this example, maybe I want to break this down and show it as some other pieces of rendering. So let's take and I'm going to create a new master. So I'll come up to the masters. So far I have the A master. I'm going to go ahead and create a new B master. You see I have A master and now I have B master. I'm going to divide the B master up a little bit differently. So let me go ahead and draw a guide here. We're going to go right there at the halfway point. Another guide here. Come on. There you go. There's the halfway point. This time I'm going to divide this up a little bit differently. So let's do, let me pull this down. Like that. Now what did I do? Sorry, I have to see. Yeah, it was 1 inch. Sorry, this needs to go up a little higher. There. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll use my frame tool and we'll do one piece there and we'll do another piece right there and another piece right there. That one got a little bit big. I'll use my direct select tool, or excuse me, my regular selection tool to adjust that. There we go. And then on this page, we'll do one whole image that goes top to bottom there. And once I have those in place, I want to deal with the spacing a little bit. So let me Control plus to zoom in. And I want to have a thin line between these little pieces. So we'll bump that over so it's a nice thin line there. And we'll bump this one down just a little bit. Like that. And so now I have a thin little space between the two. If I wanted to be consistent with this, I really should use my Align tools. Let me go to Window, Object and Layout, Align. Brings up the line. Remember, we could use spacing. I could say 1/8 of an inch. So if I did this and this with this as my key object, distribute the spacing 1/8 of an inch to make sure I have an 1/8 between. Maybe I want a 16th, 0.0625 inches. Let's try that one more time. Distribute the spacing. Not 0.625, 0.0625. There we go. There you go, nice and tight, which happens to be about what I did. Let's do this to this, same 0.0625. Sorry, I had that selected still too. This and this. There's my key object. Oh, come on. Sorry, too many objects selected at once. There, that, key object, distribute the spacing, and let's take this and this. That's the key object. Let's distribute the spacing there, just to make sure it's all consistently at a 1/16 of an inch. I'll press Control-0 to see the whole page. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm happy. Let's go ahead and move to my pages 4 and 5. So thus far, on page 4 and 5, I have the A master, which matches up with this page. I want to switch it to the B master. So you see in the upper corner of these pages it says A and A. If I wanted to go to B and B, I can right-click on the page. We can go to Apply Master to Page. And we can say, you know what, I'd rather have the B master. And now it changes to match up with the B master. I can do this first page, Apply Master to Pages, and that can also be the B master as well. So you can see that I'm evolving this as I go forward. So then I could go in and I could place some more pieces. So I'll go to File and then Place. Fitting, fill frame proportionally, and File, Place. Jump back here. Sorry, I'm looking back through my archives to see if I can find anything that would be interesting to place in here. Drop that one in, right there. Fitting, fill frame proportionally. Anyway, you start to get the idea as I drop these drawings in, and then obviously this text would change. So I'm evolving this as I go forward using the same basic layouts. So you may end up with 4 or 5 different masters. Remember, you can, of course, after the fact say, you know what, this really belongs as a bigger part of the layout. Let me go ahead and span multiple frames, or let me take this piece, I'm going to move this one over here, and I'm going to make it bigger, fitting, fill frame proportionally, so that I get the whole piece. This is going to go over here, like that. So you can see that I'm evolving it as I go, and I'm making changes to it. But it's within a certain framework that feels right. And that's kind of the critical piece of this. So now on all of these, it might come to the point where I really would like to have a page number showing up on every page. And we can work with the masters to do that as well. So let me go up to the A master here, and I'm going to zoom in to this lower right part of the page. And let's say that I want a page number to show up in this lower corner on every page. I can go ahead and create a text box. Go like that. And I'm going to justify to the right so that it's over here on the right. I'm going to use Arial again. And I'm going to make it italics. And it's going to be there. And I'm going to make the size, let's go 10 point. And I'll go ahead and I could type something. I could obviously type the page number. Let me just, for argument's sake, I'm going to put page in first. I'll ultimately get rid of this. So when I put that page piece of text in, on any page that has A, master applied, it's going to show up with page. That works just like a regular object would. But if I come back up to A master and I go to my type menu and I go to insert special character, markers, current page number, it will substitute this value where it says A with whatever the current page number is. So if I went to page 1, it now says page 1. If I went to page 3, it now says page 3. Pretty cool. Furthermore, if I reorganized my pages, let me go ahead and copy that page number marker. Go to Edit, Copy. Let me put it on the B master. We go to Edit, Paste in Place. There it is. It's on the B master now. So if we looked at page 3, it says page 3. If we looked at page 5, it says page 5. But what if I didn't like the order of the pages? So let's take page 4 and 5 and change them to be in front of page 2 and 3. Well, the page number updates automatically. So it's a really cool way of setting things up so that they will always flow nicely through your document. So let's change those pages back, there and there, and we'll drop them on page 4 and 5, and now that page updates as well. So let me go back up to the A master, and I'm going to eliminate where it says page, and I'm just going to have A listed there, which means that on any page, it's just going to have the page number. I have another thing that I can do as part of this, and this works more with like chapters of books and stuff, where you're getting a little bit more content. But I could work this into the overall context of this as well, and that is that I can establish something called numbering and section options. So let's start with page 2 here. I'm going to right-click on the page, and I'm going to go to Numbering and Section Options, and it's going to bring up this new section. So I'm going to say that this is the Artist Retreat section of my portfolio. It's going to be automatic page numbering, that's fine. But under section marker here, I'm going to type in that this is Artist Retreat. All right, so now I have Artist Retreat, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And you see that a little triangle appears above the page. Then let's say, let me add, I'm just going to duplicate these for right now. Let's say that on page 6 here, it's no longer the Artist Retreat, it's a different project. I'll right-click, and I'll go to Numbering and Section Options. And this time, it's going to be, I don't know, Mondrian Museum. So now I have Mondrian Museum there, and I'll say OK. And there's a new section marker. I can, on my master, I could put in some additional text. I could insert, let me add a bracket. I'm going to insert under type, insert special character, markers, section marker. And we'll add a little bracket there. And now, on page 3, it will say Artist Retreat 3. On page 5, oops, sorry, that was the B master. Let me update this. Paste in place, there we go. On page 5, it will still say Artist Retreat, but when I move to page 7, it's going to say Mondrian Museum. So you can establish this framework within the context of InDesign, and it will make those kinds of updates. A couple important things about page numbers. The page on the right will always be odd. The page on the left will always be even if you manually change the page numbers. It's just the way it works. It's the nature of it. So as you start to work forward, the first page here is probably your table of contents page. You could skip the first page and ultimately put a little cover on it and have your table of contents and resume show up on page 2 and 3. Then you're going to get into your first project. So what we're trying to do today is to establish some basic framework for what looks good, what feels right as part of your overall design. You have to kind of sort through that. What fonts feel right? Those parts of it. Fill in with some of this Latin text for paragraphs or text that you might want to put in. And think through your overall kind of portfolio design concept. You, as of right now, have 2 assignments that you have done for this class. You have your assignment 101 and you have your assignment 102. You may also, if you're in 121, have content from like your folding cube thing. Or folding, what's that thing called? Folding space. Right? You may have content that you created. You may have posters that you created in 121. You may have a project that you did in 120. It was like a cabin or something like that. If you have those kinds of things, try to put them in. You can always edit them out later. As part of your final for this class, you must include all of your assignments that you do in this class. So 101 through 106. And there'll be different, assignments along the way. You have to figure out how you want to present those and how they show up as part of your portfolio. I'm not under the illusion that those are the best pieces of work that you've ever done. However, it makes it an even playing field. At least everybody in this class has those 6 assignments to put in their portfolio. So if you've never done anything else and that you want to try to put in a portfolio, at least you have those 6 things to put in. If you're in 121, or if you've done projects in 120, or any other class, and you would like to include that as part of your portfolio, I would encourage you to do so. In reality, when you go to use this portfolio to apply for a scholarship, to apply for a job, or something like that, this is your first step in that portfolio. And why not start to put good content in there as well? You can always, as you can tell by the page numbers, edit out pages that you don't like, or rearrange them and put them at the end, and choose not to print them, etc. So don't be afraid to put things in now and edit them out later. All right? So as part of today, at least try to make a page for assignment 101 and 102. If you have other content, try to put that in as well. The more that you try to do today, the more that you experiment today, the better off you're going to be. One of the other things that people tend to do as part of the portfolios is they'll assume that, let's say you do a 24 by 36 layout of an AutoCAD drawing. They assume that they have to put the 24 by 36 layout exactly as it was done. Well, when you get into portfolios, a lot of times you move stuff around. You cut pieces out, you put them in differently, you identify them differently. So use this as a different framework. Don't just like, for example, your posters that you've been doing as part of 121. The temptation is, here's all my posters. But you could also use the content from those posters and rearrange them on a page like this. It may be useful. So just be aware of that as an option. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so I want you guys to all start working on that. You will post at least a spread. And so when we get to exporting this, right, let's say that I like page 2 and 3. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Export. Of course, you'll do File, Save. You'll save your InDesign file. That's obvious. We will go to File and then Export. And when we go to Export, you can still use JPEG. And when I click Save, you'll see that there's an option down here instead of pages for spreads. We're going to check the box for spreads, and then under range, we're going to pick page numbers. So for example, range would be 2 to 3. Quality maximum, baseline 300. Color space, CMYK. All right? And we'll go ahead and export. And what I will end up with is a JPEG. Of course, I put this in the wrong. I think this is it. We'll end up with a JPEG. Oh, come on. That is my overall page. So it goes across the spread, and we see how it's laid out in its entirety. That's what you're going to post as part of today. Does that make sense? So it's one spread, not an individual page. All right, go for it.